A local newspaper in the Solomon Islands, the Solomon Star, has slammed the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP, after it was revealed that the newspaper received nearly $140,000 in funding from the Chinese government in return for pledges to promote China. The newspaper has since published a story in response to the investigation, alleging OCCRP is making unrelenting attempts to tarnish the Solomon Star. OCCRP lead editor for the Pacific, Aubrey Belford, told Lydia Lewis the investigation was built off a leaked document and interviews.
We're not interested in tarnishing anyone's reputation. The reason we did this story is not because Solomon Star received funding from China. It's their right to receive funding from wherever they want. What made this a story for us was actually that this was a clear case where funding was contingent on an outlet in the Pacific telling China's story positively. You know, that this was funding in return for what is essentially positive coverage for a geopolitical player in the region. And that's why it was interesting and newsworthy for us.
Can you tell me more about this document? Can you explain to me the verification process and how that document verifies what you're saying?
So we received a copy of this document last week in which Solomon Star pledges about a dozen times to give positive coverage to China in return for money. It's a very detailed and itemized request for new equipment, for printing equipment and also broadcast equipment for their radio station, Power FM. And so the way that we verified it, firstly, we called Solomon Star. We spoke to their chief of staff, Alfred Sasako, and we also spoke to the publisher at the time of the proposal, Kathy Lamani, who has since left. They confirmed that they did make this proposal, although I didn't want to talk in too much detail about it. You know, we also worked to verify the document by seeing if the equipment that was listed in there was actually delivered. So there was a quote in the document from an Australian printing supplier in Brisbane. So we called them up and we asked and sent a copy of the quote and said, is this genuine? And did you deliver this equipment? And they confirmed that yes, the quote is genuine and all of the items listed on the quote were delivered in February this year. They actually went to the Solomon Islands to install it. They also confirmed for us that the equipment was paid for by the Solomon Star. So the Chinese embassy didn't pay for it directly. The money appears to have been given to the Solomon Star first, and then they bought the equipment.
Secondly, they talked about, the funding that OCCRP receives. They did still quote the fact that you have a clause and you always explain that your funding has a specific clause that no one can, have a say in your stories. But how do you pitch your stories? And can you just explain what that clause means and how you make sure that no one can have a say in your stories?
Sure. So OCCRP is funded by a mix of non-government and government donors from around the world. And we have a very strictly independent editorial policy, which means we do not talk to our donors about what stories that we're going to do. And we certainly don't promise to give anyone positive coverage. And in fact, we regularly write critical stories about all sorts of people, including Western governments and their allies and, local politicians and things that can be close to Western governments. In the Pacific, we've done some quite major and hard-hitting stories in Papua New Guinea that involved suspect payments from an Australian businessman to a politician who was killed last year who had shepherded in Australia's largest infrastructure investment under their Pacific Step Up. So we actually take it as a point of pride to really go after everyone. So, actually the kind of issue with this story, again, is not that a particular government is funding Pacific Media. The issue is that the situation is so dire now that you have Pacific Media that are promising positive coverage to a country with no press freedom itself in return for that money. So, what we would actually like to see is for democratic governments to step up and actually help support the existence of independent media in the region. And that means supporting media in the region that are not always going to tell nice stories about Western countries, that aren't always going to say nice things about New Zealand or Australia or United States, that will investigate and hold to account people involved in implementing policies of those governments, corruption connected to those countries. That's the price of having a free media. But if we don't support a free media, what we end up with are, deals that are money in return for positive coverage. And that's what, the heart of this story.
So just to be clear, OCCRP did not pitch or explain in any way to its donors of the story that the story would any way relate to China?
No, we just don't. We don't talk to our donors about what stories we're working on. They just have no say. And
according to Shailendra Singh, who spoke to the ABC, he's saying that the big question now is, are we witnessing media capture? What's your point of view on this? Are there any facts to back this up through your reporting?
There definitely have been overtures made in Pacific countries from China to the media. Solomon Islands does seem to be an extreme case, but we have also documented different approaches. For example, in Palau, we found that the publisher of the oldest newspaper there had entered into an offshore deal with a businessman who was China's unofficial representative in the country, and also a group of companies based in mainland China that are actually tied to national security institutions, specifically to the police university in Beijing, and also a military university in these businessmen's home province that actually works on cyber warfare, information warfare. So yes, we do see these sort of approaches. I think the big thing when we're looking at Chinese efforts to influence the media is, firstly, it has to be acknowledged that there is no press freedom in China. There is no concept right now from the Chinese state that by supporting the media, you're supporting a free and open, civil space. You just don't see that. And in fact, it's very much, in China's domestic media or abroad, an expectation that the role of journalists is to tell China's story well. And that's really what we're seeing. Secondly, what we see is that efforts to influence the media are often tied up with what we call elite capture. So it's not simply that you have the press pushing a pro-Chinese line in return for money, but that by cultivating elites in the media, you're helping to cultivate an elite that is, in some cases beholden to China, that will have other business relationships that compromise them. So that's kind of the picture that we're seeing emerging. I don't think it's worth people, completely losing their heads over. There is a lot of great professional journalism in the region, a lot of independent-minded Pacific journalists, and most of them know very much the difference between aid funding from democratic governments that supports a free media and an authoritarian government giving money in return for being praised.